Hello again, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Tom Nelson, and this is video lesson number 1, part number 2, the cause of diabetes continued. In video 1, part 1, you learned what chronic inflammation is. Now you're going to learn how the diet has changed over the last 100 years that has actually been responsible for this pandemic of diabetes that we're seeing today. 120 years ago, our ancestors ate eggs, bacon, real butter, real whole milk, potatoes and gravy, red meats, bakery products of all types, desserts, candies, all of those things, and yet there were no issues. Diabetes was almost unheard of 100 years ago. But everything they ate back then was organically based. They lived in small communities, most of them, that were surrounded by family-run organic farms. And they either bought from them, or many of them had their own gardens and grew their own organic foods. So let's take a look at some of those changes that have taken place that are particularly notable. First of all, in the late 1800s, Louis Pasteur and his cohorts were experimenting and learning more and more about bacteria and its relationship to issues with our health. And they did not know that there is such a thing as a beneficial bacteria. And so they felt that the best way to resolve health issues was to get rid of bacteria altogether. And so they pasteurized and developed the pasteurization process of food. And so that has stuck with us. Unfortunately, again, it destroys a lot of good beneficial bacteria right along with the bad. In the 1930s, the homogenization of dairy began. And they only did it because they were having issues with the cream separating out of dairy while it sat on the grocer's shelf. So homogenization breaks down all of the fats in the dairy into very minuscule particles. But until very recently, they didn't know that those little minuscule particles happen to be type B, life-threatening, very dangerous forms of LDL cholesterol. They enter the bloodstream very rapidly, they go directly to the arteries, and they raise havoc. They create massive amounts of plaque. In 1948, antibiotics were invented. They saved millions of lives, but they're now so overly prescribed that we're now seeing super bugs that these antibiotics will no longer resolve because they've mutated. So they do good, but they also do bad. They destroy a massive amount of the beneficial bacteria that we rely on in our gut as well. In the 1950s, the fast food industry became a very popular thing, and it's exploded worldwide since. And fast food, as you know, has absolutely no nutritional value. It's 100% fat, carbohydrates, sugars, and no real benefit whatsoever. Extremely high in calories. In the 1970s, Richard Nixon, President Nixon, nominated Earl Butz as the head of the Agriculture Department. And Mr. Butz decided that he was going to stop subsidizing the family-run organic farm, and he was going to solve the world hunger problems by creating massive and subsidizing massive conglomerate farms. They were businesses. They were massive, and some of them are 10,000 or more acres, where those little organic farms were usually less than 30 acres. So as a business, they started looking at all the reasons why their profits were being compromised, and so they started hiring chemists to produce chemical fertilizers, pesticides, fungicides, and herbicides to increase the productivity of their crops. And then they hired scientists to create genetic engineering of those crops. It did some good. I mean, there were no more disease issues for some crops. Drought wasn't as big of a problem. They often could even increase the volume of productivity from each plant. But they neglected to note that half of the nutrition is gone once they're genetically engineered. So then, because of genetic engineering, they were producing so much of these wheat, corn, and soy in particular, that they started looking for markets for it, and the feedlot livestock farms began. That's where they raise from birth to the slaughter, sometimes even inside a building. They may not even see daylight. They feed them this corn, wheat, and soy grain, which is not their natural diet. It's very inexpensive, and it does fatten them up, but it is not healthy for them. They do not have an acidic system, so those acidic feeds make them very sick, And so consequently, they give them antibiotics mixed in their food to keep them alive. And they also mix in their food hormones, growth hormones, that will take them to market in a significantly faster process. In other words, chickens, for example, can go to market in as little as 30 days. Genetic engineering of the crops and feedlot livestock has created some very serious issues in our diet. Now there have been, in the past 50 years, over 80,000 new chemicals developed. We now are exposed to almost 7,000 of those every single day, just in things we touch. Our skin will absorb chemicals very readily, and a lot of products now have had chemical additives to try to improve their performance, but the health aspect of it was neglected. This is an example of a toothpaste tube. Read your own toothpaste tube, and you'll note that there's a warning on it that says if you accidentally swallow more than used for brushing, you should seek professional help and contact the poison control immediately. That is a very serious warning. That means you're using chemicals that are possibly poisonous every single day when you brush your teeth, and your mouth is one of the most absorptive areas in your body. So it's becoming more and more important that you read the label every single time you buy anything. And if it has chemical additives, don't buy it. During World War II, the federal governments created processing of food in order to feed the armies that were all over the world. And so consequently, that has become a very popular thing. Women at that time didn't stay home. They went to work in the factories to support the war effort. And when the war ended, they didn't go home. They stayed working. They really liked having those additional income. So the processed food just flourished. And as competition grew, it became more and more important that it looked good and it tasted good. And of course, they overcook it to kill anything that's in it. And so consequently, we ended up with processed foods, which has almost no nutritional value and is loaded with chemical additives. Crops used to be rotated, and they are not anymore. It's called monocropping. And so consequently, the soil is depleted of many nutrients. Crops are now harvested up to several weeks early, and they're ripened in specialized containers on the way to market using chemical gases. But the problem is that those chemical gases aren't going to put in the vitamins that should have been allowed to enter those vegetables or fruits during the final few weeks of their ripening, because that's when a lot of them do enter. So consequently, our food, because of all of this, is lower in nutrition and void of antioxidants. So processors of the food, and some of them are also these conglomerate farmers as well, now cook the foods at extremely high temperatures to make certain that there are no recalls for bacteria issues. But that destroys not only the nutrients and many important enzymes that your body normally would rely on from food, but it also structurally modifies that food so that your antigens won't recognize it at all. Every cell in your body has antigens, little antenna-like structures that sense anything in the bloodstream that shouldn't be there. And because of all the modification and the massive amount of cooking, then they no longer recognize it as a natural substance. It's the texture enhancers, the food coloring, salt that itself is being highly processed, sugar that's highly processed, and preservatives, all artificial sweeteners. All of those things are going to cause an antigen reaction, which is going to get your immune system involved, and inflammation is going to form. So then they're placed in a plastic lined can, that BPA, and that's already been flagged as a cause of childhood obesity. Sodas and colas have virtually no nutritional value whatsoever. All chemicals in distilled water, which draws all of the trace minerals out of your body, is used in bottled or canned sodas. So sodas have virtually no redeeming value whatsoever. They don't even hydrate you, they dehydrate you. All things in nature, plants, animals, and humans, have those antigens that I described, and they're all unique to each and every one of them. Everything that enters the body is going to be evaluated, and it's going to be flagged if it is not supposed to be in that bloodstream. This is a picture of antigens. The one on the left, you can see those antenna structures sticking up. The one on the right is an artist rendition of what a cell might look like with antigens on it. So incompatible antigens are going to cause an immune inflammatory reaction. The immune system is going to produce antibodies for the identified intruder, and they will destroy it. Inflammation is the primary tool for destroying and removing those intruders. This is an atom. It's everything in existence is made from atoms at its very basic level. They all have a nucleus and they all have electrons. They're normally very stable, but your immune system will strip off some of those electrons, which will cause that atom to become very unstable and very violent and very hot. And so that will cause inflammation. So some foods are going to cause immune reactions as well. Gluten is a huge one. Wheat is a huge one. Dairy, corn, and soy are very, very big producers of immune reactions. The others and most foods do have some, but they're really pretty low level and they're usually pretty rare. So overcooking food can cause your body to not recognize organic foods as natural. Even broccoli may not be recognized as broccoli. It's be treated as an intruder. Table salt and sugar are extremely high processed. Frying, broiling, grilling, or worse is a very bad scenario, not only because of the extreme high temperatures, but because of the way it alters the foods. Inflammation leads to rapid weight gain, and that rapid weight gain leads to insulin resistance. We're going to cover that in great detail in the future videos. It'll cause elevated blood sugar, elevated insulin levels, cell death and damage, and much more. So the chemicals in your food, your environment, your medications, along with a bad diet, kill off and starve very important bacteria that you rely on that's in your gut. That destroys a critical barrier that protects and enables your immune system to work. And it'll form leaky gut. That means that the cells that make up the lining of your intestines is going to lose some of its integrity, and that will cause loose-fitting bonds between them and all kinds of bad things like fecal matter, bacteria, pathogens, viruses, and undigested food will go right through that lining of your intestines, and it's going to go out into your body's general area. It's going to be picked up by the bloodstream, and it's going to be transported and stored in cells and tissues throughout your entire body. And that's going to cause massive amounts of inflammation throughout your body. So how do you apply this in your daily routine? Again, it's virtually important that you eliminate all of the chemicals and irritants from entering your body to begin with. Don't overcook your food, obviously. Never drink tap water. It's loaded with all kinds of chemicals, bacteria. It's loaded with parasites and parasite eggs and just a whole lot of things you don't want in there. Filter your water. Never drink from a plastic water bottle. Only eat organic, non-GMO foods. Switch to an environmentally friendly cleaning products to use at home, to use as shampoos or body wash or laundry detergents or dish soaps. All of those things are very dangerous chemicals that you do get a dose of every time you wear the washed clothes or eat off of those washed dishes. So now proceed to lesson number 2, part 1. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and please pay it forward. Share what you learned with others. Thank you.